Welcome to the fourth and final segment of Lecture 2. In this segment, I will review what we've said about the compositional organization of the grammar of the clause and the grammar as a whole. Clause consisting of groups phrases consisting of words consisting of morphemes, and put that together with the metafunctional strands of meaning introduced in segment 3. And that would then allow us to project the map that we call the function rank matrix, the combination of these two dimensions, giving us a two-dimensional map or view of the overall resources of the grammar of English. So as I said before, that will allow us to explain the principle behind this cover image. I will start again reviewing the vertical dimension, the rank scale, the compositional hierarchy. So that's the vertical dimension. Clauses consisting of groups phrases and groups consisting of words, and although I haven't shown it, they're words consisting of morphemes, and then intersected, as I said, with the horizontal dimension of the spectrum of metafunctional meanings, the different strands of meanings that run through the grammar, the meanings that the grammar constructs as wordings. So the metafunction are represented by the column headings, the horizontal dimension, and the ranked units, the compositional hierarchy, by the vertical dimension. So as I said, I'll start by reviewing the rank scale. Now in English, in the description of English, the rank scale is clause consisting of groups, phrases, groups consisting of words, and words consisting of morphemes. And as I've said, this is a compositional hierarchy. Just as, for example, when you provide a compositional hierarchy of the body, the whole organism, organs, tissues, cells, etc. Let me turn to example I used before. Gentle breezes blew over the Nile. This comes from a retelling of a traditional story. You see here, it's set in Egypt. Mutemwia gave a cry of joy at seeing Senefru, for she had missed him. As Pharaoh gave her his gifts, he said, "You cannot leave me, Mutemwia, for you are my most true and honest friend." Gentle breezes blew over the Nile. The women who rowed the boat were strong and graceful. Mutemwia's voice was sweet to Pharaoh's ears as she steered the boat and sang. So this clause, gentle breezes blew over the Nile. As you remember, I represented it before in terms of the anatomy. Clauses consisting of groups, there are no phrases here serving in the clause, groups consisting of words, or in one case, a phrase serving as if it was a word, and words consisting of morphemes, just an illustration. So there are three elements of the clause: gentle breezes, blue, and over the Nile. These are groups. The first group consists of two words, gentle breezes. The second, or one, blue. And the third is a phrase, actually, of the preposition over and then a downrank group, the Nile. And as an illustration of the composition of words into morphemes, or the segmentation of words into morphemes, breezes, breeze plus z, the plural suffix. So that's the final rank morpheme. Now this is a model that has evolved in English. We find it in various other languages. It would apply to Chinese too. but there is quite a bit of variation across languages in where they do most of the work or how they divide the labor, the grammatical labor across ranks. So of course all languages will do a good deal of work at clause rank, but then languages vary in the division of labor between group rank and word rank. So a language like Vietnamese, for example, does very little work at word rank. A language like Panare or Inuit does a lot of work at word rank. And there is then a trade-off between group and word rank. So-called polysynthetic languages are languages which do a lot of work at word rank, in particular in the verbs. They're kind of projections of clause structure from the point of view of Chinese or English. Let's take another example. I've been working hard all this morning, or I've been working hard all morning. This comes from a passage of text. We've just moved into a new house and I've been working hard all morning. I've been working hard this morning, a little variant of it. And then this actually is sent as a question. And the question the writer submits is, I've been wondering if I could rewrite this excerpt using the present perfect simple only. We just moved into a new house and I worked hard all morning. I've tried, etc. So that is just an illustration of the possibility within the group have been working of variants. And they variants are as were the internal structure of that group, a verbal group. But it doesn't affect its contribution overall as a constituent element of the clause. But let's vary this a little bit. I've been working hard all morning, or I've been working hard this morning. Let's take the variant clause. Have you been working hard this morning? You see the sequence of words is a bit different, of elements of the clause. First, we can go back to what we did before. We can ask, what are the classes of words serving in this clause indirectly? You have exercises and Kahoots on this. So we can fill this in and we say, have is a verb, you a pronoun, been a verb, working a verb, hard an adverb, this a determiner, and morning a noun. Now when we look at further variants of this, we play around and see what are the options, the choices that this particular version of the clause contrasts with. We can see that the words actually function together. They're not manipulable individually within the clause, but they function together as groups, as units within the clause. So for example, we can move around this morning. Have you been working hard this morning? Or this morning, have you been working hard? Or manipulating the sequence of you and have, you have been working hard this morning. So what this shows is an important principle, that elements of the clause can be manipulated as organic wholes. We don't move this around or morning around. The variation is with respect to the whole group. Internally, we can also change them. So have you been working hard this morning? Or have you been working very hard? Or have you been working much harder than our neighbors this morning? And so on. So elements of the clause can also be expanded internally. There's more evidence that they are not just single, simple, isolated words, but they're groups of words. And that's, of course, what we have already postulated. This rank between word and clause of group or group phase. So in this particular version of the example, have been working, that's a verbal group. Now, interestingly, we'll be able to explain that later, the first verb can be split off from the rest of the verbal group. So the verbal group can be discontinuous in English, and something like a nominal group can intervene. So you is a nominal group with a pronoun as the thing. The verbal group is then have ... been working, and then hard is an adverb, but it serves as a verbal group, and as I've already illustrated, it can be expanded. It has the potential of an expanded verbal group. Very hard, or very much much harder than our neighbors, for example. So an adverbial group or a nominal group or a verbal group is minimally just one word of the relevant class, but they can be expanded. And then finally, this morning, as we've already seen, it can be manipulated, it can move around in the clause, and that's evidence that this and morning don't serve directly in the clause, but they serve as parts of another unit, a group, a nominal group. So you remember the word classes and the classification, the taxonomy word classes, both determiners and nouns are nominal words. And that class of nominal words includes adjectives, numerals as well. So that is, groups of words function together as organic wholes in the clause. And that's an advance over the model that came through to us from traditional grammar. The model in traditional grammar was simply words in clauses or sentences. But we need to recognize that in between words and clauses, we have groups of words. So it's like saying we don't go straight from the organism, the whole organism, to tissues. We recognize that in between the organism and tissues, in the composition of organisms, we have organs. So the work that the grammar has to do in constructing meaning as wording is parcel out across these units on the rank scale. So again, the adverbial group, hard, can be expanded very hard, or much harder than you usually do, or whatever. Now this is, to recap the terminology from before, this is an anatomical view of the clause, the anatomy of the clause. But we've already seen that we also need to explain the functions, the contributions that the groups make to the construction of meaning in the clause, and indeed the words to the construction of meaning in the groups. So this anatomy of the clause, this is the anatomy of the clause, but as I noted, we also need a physiology. So we splice in the functional perspective. When we do so for the clause, we find that there are three separate strands, as we've already seen. So in addition to these sequence of classes, we have function structures. And in the case of the clause, the function structure consists of three strands. The function structure of the clause, splicing in functional analysis to show textual, interpersonal, experiential functions that the groups and phrases serve in the clause. So you serves the function of contributing to the theme and subject, very hard as manner adjunct, this morning as time adjunct, both within the rime. The verbal group is, as we've already seen, split. The first verb, have, serves together with you to form the mood element. Have is the finite, and the remainder of the verbal group serves within the non-mood, the residue, as predicator. And have been working serves as the process, experientially, with an actor, you, nominal group. This is again just a preview of what we will be talking about in more detail as we go through the semester. So we go from anatomy only to anatomy plus physiology, splicing in the function structure. And the function structure reveals the strands of meaning in the organization of the clause. So that's the advantage you get when you interpret the grammar functionally. You bring out the way it constructs meanings within different functions or metafunctions. And this kind of diagram we'll be working with throughout the semester. We'll call it simply box diagram because it represents the organization of the clause as a box with the different layers in the function structures as rows, like the theme reme, mood residue, finite subject predicator, process actor, and so on. And with the columns representing the elements of the relevant units. Now, as you see, if you think of this as constituent or component parts, the different functional strands may impose different organization of the clause. And that's one key to the understanding of the way in which the clause is, as it were, a compromise or a unification of textual, interpersonal, experiential considerations. And while I will refer on occasion to other languages, if we had more time, I would be able to show you a very interesting variation in the way that languages have, as it were, resolved the tension inherent in the unification of the different functional strands in different ways. But this is the English model. Just another example of working hard. This comes from a little video clip, which I won't show you, with a little caption. I've been working hard since 3 a.m. You see, that's a clause, but then you see this clause is expanded by another clause. Why have you been working hard? Well, in order to get your favorite, in order to get all your favorites ready. So this is Baker, obviously. I've been working very hard since 3 a.m. One clause, and then it's linked through a logical semantic relation of purpose to get all your favorites ready. That's then the way in which clauses are combined. So in addition to the internal organizational clause, which we'll spend most of the time together on this semester, the grammar also provides us with resources for linking clauses together structurally to get all your favorites ready. So just a quick recap. We've now met a number of dimensions in terms of which lexicogrammar is organized. Remember, lexicogrammar is a combined resources of grammar, grammatical structure, grammatical items like the, and, of, it, and vocabulary or lexical items. And the two are combined through what we'll call a line of delicacy, from very general grammatical choices to specific lexical ones. I've only mentioned that, and I'll come back to it because it is, of course, very important in understanding the continuity between grammar and lexis, grammar and vocabulary. Then two dimensions that I've now spent some time on, the spectrum of metafunctions. They operate in parallel, they're simultaneous. So the strands they engender are unified, experiential, interpersonal, textual, within the clause. And the rank scale. For English, clause consisting of group phrases, groups consisting of words, sorry I got that wrong, and words consisting of morphemes. Now, as I've said before, when we intersect the rank scale and the spectrum of metafunction, we can create a map or matrix of the systems that together make up the wording potential of the lexicogrammar of a language. And that will be our next step. Now, what's the wording potential? Well, that's precisely the potential for constructing meanings as wordings. So I'll go back to, for a moment, to our schematic version that I've used as a cover image for each weekly presentation. That's a schematic version. Let me give you now a more detailed version where we can locate systems that we were focusing on together throughout the semester. The column headings are the same. They are the metafunctions. And the row headings come from the rank scale, from the compositional scale. And I've just shown you two ranks here. Clauses, and the next one, the units they consist of, groups, phrases. And then I've given you the primary classes of these group phrases: verbal group, nominal group, adverbial group, prepositional phrase. And we could extend this, of course, to show that below groups we have words, below words we have morphemes. Now, when you put these together, then you have a map of the overall resources of the grammar. And that includes the resources we'll come to towards the end of the semester. The resources for linking clauses together into chains of clauses. Clause combining resources, or forming clause complexes by means of logico-semantic relations. So that's creating structure external to individual clauses. Systems for linking clauses into clause complexes. And the linking relations are what are called logico-semantic relations. We already had one example a minute ago. One clause: I've been working hard since 3 a.m. And that's linked to another clause: I've been working hard since 3 a.m. Why? To get all your favorites ready. So here there is a relationship of purpose. We gloss it as in order to, and in fact we could expand to in order to, or so as to. So purpose is one kind of cause, and cause is one kind of logico-semantic relation, together with reason, condition, concession, and together with simple addition or alternation or exemplification, restatement, and so on. So later we'll look in some detail at these logico-semantic relations. They are, as it were, part of the natural logic or the grammatical logic of language. And those of you who come across sentential logic or propositional calculus, you've actually seen that part of some of these relations have, as it were, been taken as a starting point for designing a form of symbolic logic, propositional calculus. They're based ultimately on the resource of the clause complex in natural language. And then we look at we start with this, the internal organization of a clause. The clause organized textually, interpersonally, experientially as simultaneous resources. The systems for organizes clauses internally. I said these engender strands of functions in the function structure, and they're mapped onto one another or unified by the clause grammar. Clause experiential, that's clauses figure. Interpersonal clauses move, and textual clauses message. We'll start with clauses message, so that's textual interpretation of a clause. As I already said, the main system, the key system, is system of theme, but there are some other systems too: voice, conjunction. Then we'll move on to the interpersonal view of the clause as a move, an interactive move in dialogue, and the exchange of meanings in dialogue. Key system here is mood, but there are also other interpersonal systems: modality, polarity, vocative, and a few others. And finally, in our overview of the resource of the clause, we look at the clause experientially. And here the system is transitivity, system for construing the clause as a figure. Now these all correspond to different chapters in your textbook. You're already this week into chapter 2. That deals with the textual perspective on the clause as message. Then we'll move on to chapter 3, mood, clauses, exchange, some moves and exchanges. And then finally to chapter 4, clause as a figure, clause as a representation. And these are the 3 chapters you have to focus on to do your 3 assignments, each corresponding then to 1 assignment. That's the first one to worry about. No, not worry about, get excited about. The second one, assignment 2, and then assignment 3. So let me just review this. That when we analyze a clause grammatically, we do so using a combination of class structure, anatomy, and function structure, physiology. So class structure, we identify just the limbs, as well, the component parts. And in function structure, we specify the functional contributions, the contributions these parts make in the construction of meaning as patterns or wordings in the clause. So let me review this with a little animation. This is where we splice in the function structure, textual, interpersonal, and experiential. So metafunctional analysis of clauses and other grammatical units is designed to bring out the different complementary strands of meaning in the grammar. Interpersonal, textual, logical, and experiential. And as far as the clause is concerned, the internal organization is textual, interpersonal, experiential, and the organization linking clauses together is logical. Now, I've used the metaphor of a spectrum of meaning because what appears to be just one kind of meaning, if you hold up a prism, the theory of the metafunctional organization of language in general, and grammar in particular, you'll see the different bandwidth within the spectrum. Now, let me just note, if you'd like a supplementary reading to the textbook, you could go through Jeff Thompson's chapter 3 in his Introducing Functional Grammar, an overview of functional grammar, 3 kinds of meaning. So if you wanted to supplement the textbook, you could do that, but it's voluntary, it's not necessary. Well, that's the end of this week's discussion presentation. Next week we'll move on to lecture 3, and then we'll start with the textual organization of the clause, looking at the clause as a message, as a clause as a quantum of information in the flow of information that's constructed when text unfolds in context. And we'll start, as you usually do, with a recap, then introduce the textual grammar of the clause. We look at the significance, the textual significance of beginnings of clauses, sort of ways into clauses, the notion of the thematic principle. We'll ask how far the theme extends into the clause. But I think you're already reading chapter 2, but certainly if you read the essential parts of chapter 2 by next week or review them, you will be well placed. And of course, remember, pay attention to the exercises. We'll also have Kahoots for this part of the grammar, so lecture 3, 4, when we deal with the textual organization. Okay, thank you.